Yeah, I don't know how many of you were at DevSec this year, but it was amazing to see how it really highlighted Canada's strengths in terms of digital twinning, VR, and AR. I know Kevin mentioned earlier that he wasn't aware of how many Canadian companies were in the space, and yeah, it's true. Canada really is becoming a center of excellence for these types of technologies, and that's something we wanted to highlight as part of this event. Through the industrial technology benefits program and the context of massive naval projects in Canada, there's a lot of opportunity for collaboration between the partners present here, the primes, Canadian small and medium-sized businesses, academia, the Navy. So before we kick off into the first panel to hear about the role of Canadian small and medium-sized businesses, we're going to hear from Duncan McSporran. Duncan is a former military officer. He's also the COO of Cognitive Spark, a leader in the AR and MR sector. Duncan has a background in applied remote sensing, cartography, and GIS. And he's a graduate of the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst and Oxford Brookes University. Duncan served in various operational leadership roles as an industry officer in the British Army, and was fortunate enough to also be seconded with both the US Army and Canadian Armed Forces. Following his military service, Duncan and his family settled in New Brunswick. He then took on roles with UNB and across the region with the Springboard Applied Research Network. In 2016, along with his business partner, Ryan Groom, he set up Cognitive Spark, which has grown into a global leader in the field of augmented and mixed reality, helping on-site teams deal with complex problem solving. So Duncan, as someone who's at the forefront of building relationships and leading the AR and MR industry in Canada, tell us a little bit about Cognitive Spark and your experience with the innovations.
Yeah, that's a great introduction. Thank you very much, Greg. I genuinely appreciate it. I'm going to do what most people do. I'm going to revert to some slides. So if you will just bear with me as I bring those up, and we'll crack on through just to allow people to get that sense for what we are. I'll just maximize that and then crack on with playing from the start. Company background is really important because our path to where we're at with augmented mixed reality is different to almost everybody else. We set the company up from scratch. So we weren't trying to take something that existed in a two-dimensional environment and create something that would work on some of the emerging three-dimensional platforms. What we did, though, to start with, was we assessed where the applications for augmented mixed reality would be, and whether that was in simple applications such as remote worker assistance, or whether it was in our vision for where this was going to go to, which was what we heard Wolfgang speaking about very clearly earlier on, which is the long-term aim with digital twinning. And the key thing that we identified very early on was two aspects. Firstly, that this was not about the computer systems. This was about the people that were going to use them. This was about how they were going to utilize application of knowledge at their point of need, and whether that was in a simple learning process or it was in an engineering context. That was based really on both Ryan and my own personal experiences, and mine particularly in the military, of what the end use cases for augmented and mixed reality would be. The second was that in order to meet the needs of those end users, we would also have to actually address all of the challenges and issues that would exist within the systems and the infrastructures that companies already have and organizations already have. So what we did philosophically was we set ourselves up as a cybersecurity company to build mixed reality solutions. And that has taken us down a really technically challenging but very satisfying route, where we've ended up with a solution where we own every line of code in our own work, and also that meets all the needs of partners globally, particularly in the areas of cyber defense, but also increasingly in the areas of where this will work and how it will work. And that mantra has served us incredibly well. As I go through these few slides now, hopefully that will really sort of resonate with the view that a lot of you will have about how and why mixed reality is going to have an impact, but also understanding many of those challenges that Jennifer referred to earlier on about implementation and getting it into the workspace. This is what it's about. This is about the human in the loop. You hear that expression an awful lot, but it comes very much from that understanding of the fact that we're trying to enable your team or our team to do the work that they do in a way which they've not previously done. and in a way which enables them to achieve their task and to do the mission that they've been given in a really effective way. On that slide, you'll see something that I took from my own military experience and knowledge and what I was trained on in the military, and that's just the OODA loop. And that's Boyd's OODA loop about how fighter pilots work and how their brains react. It's an OODA loop, but it's amended because the OODA loop is about an individual. This is actually about the team, and this is how we make our teams work more effectively, but it's very similar. But this is why mixed reality matters. This is why it matters to the people who are going to use it. This is why people, when they put it on their heads, as you know, Jennifer again was reflecting earlier on, how they use augmented or mixed reality or virtual reality or any of the digital twin capabilities. That very small list of really key components is really important to us as humans, that we have that clarity, that we have certainty of comprehension, that the team knows that everybody's doing things right, that we can reduce the cognitive fatigue of individuals, that they're not struggling on the job because they don't have the information that they need. But also importantly, that we collectively, when we're using augmented and mixed reality, can achieve decisive collaboration to have real impact in the workplace. And that's what we see reflected in our customers who have got this system of ours deployed operationally, whether that's on the federal side of things with the Royal Canadian Navy, or it's in the industrial side in deep challenging environments such as nuclear power, or in one of our best use cases, actually in a chocolate factory right here in New Brunswick. A lot of our rationale and what you hear me talking about and maybe reflecting on the roundtable as we move to that came from our own thought leadership, but also the thought leadership of Admiral Lloyd when he was commander of the Royal Canadian Navy. And he gave us this project, gave us a challenge. He gave it to his staff initially. And then as his staff were introduced to us by Microsoft were asked, could you do this? Microsoft said no, but we've got a partner in Canada that we think you should work with, and we know they can. And this challenge that came through, which developed into Project Maris, and you'll hear a bit more of that from Maze, I'm sure, in a few moments, really set down some really key aspects. And I just want to draw your attention to the bottom bullet there, and that's deliver industry-leading solutions within those constraints. I've touched on a lot of all of those other points as we've gone through already, but really it was delivering it into an operational environment. This was not about making something that would work solely in a high bandwidth situation or test bed. This was something created in order to really meet the needs of the end user, making mixed reality work where the end user needs it to work. It's no good at working in a multi-megabit connected demonstration space if it won't work in the engineering spaces of a Halifax class frigate. We've touched on some of these already with the presentations. This is a much cruder version of one of Jennifer's great slides that she put up, and also reflects again on a lot of what Wolfgang put up on his slides as well. Tasks and functions, these are the things that the end users are using it for already. They're doing it for remote on-site task guidance or after-action reviews, but the use cases are the operational cases. And in every one of these bullets that you see up there, it's currently deployed and it's currently being used by customers of Cognitive Spark. And part of that is because of that system and that approach that we had. The system that we've developed is so robust that it can work in these the environments and these operational environments. Now, people are actually using this right now as we speak. I can go around the corner and have a look at calls that are happening right now around the world where people are using it for these use cases in order to carry out these tasks. And last week, that included being used in Resolute Bay, which is the most remote northerly town in Canada at 74 degrees north, I think it is, with a call back to support people working in Ottawa. This is where we're at, and this is really sort of the roadmap, if you will, and really sort of the direction of travel, not just for us, but for others as well, in augmented mixed reality. Again, at the core of this, making this work where the end user needs it and making sure that it services the needs of that person that's going to be bending a wrench, bending a spanner, or needs the situational awareness of that digital twin that we were talking about earlier on. And we're already at step 5. We already have products at market with fully integrated IoT, and we create 3D holographic digital twins powered by IoT and with the ability to pull ERP data into it. And then over the next 6 to 8 months, we'll be going through the transition to Remote Spark 2.0. You'll see there just one thing I'll take out of this slide before we conclude, and I hand over back the presentation. The 3 levels at the bottom: operator, remote, task support. That's where we're at now, and that's what we deliver on a regular basis. Where our partners and customers are moving to is operator autonomy. That's increasing use of things like digital twins, but also the availability of that digital resource, that knowledge that people need at the point of need, the ability to be able to access that. And then finally, those mixed reality enabled workflows, which is the digital twin and the completely digitized environment, which will allow all of the power of what we're talking about to be fully maximized. And with the partners we work with, particularly with Microsoft, that's very much within our grasp right now, and certainly is the direction of travel that almost all of our customers are moving to. That's me. That's just the contact details. Always put that in at the end of the slide. But if anybody does want anything specific from me, either bring it up on the chat and I'll answer those as we move forwards, or just reach out.
Yeah, thanks so much, Duncan. That's really such a good look at what you guys are doing and what a leader in the space is taking advantage of. I know that anything that can work in Resolute Bay can work anywhere, so that was a good example for sure. Next up, we have Mays Majdoub. He's the commanding officer of the Naval Training Development Center Pacific at the DND, Department of National Defense. Thank you so much for joining us, Mays. If you could just take a few moments to show us what you're up to at the DND and the Navy with these technologies, I think we'd all be interested in seeing that.
Absolutely. So what I'll do is I'll just share the screen right now. So here we go. So I just really want to get into the genesis of what is the INX Center. It's a Naval Experimental Technical Training Center. And essentially, when I first joined the team, what was very apparent was that, we're basically the Ministry of Education for the Navy, and specifically all the technical trades, engineers and technicians. We're grabbing folks who have a grade 10 education and making them sometimes, full-on technicians. And I'm telling you on the left of the arc here. But it takes our team in the Ministry of Education roughly 2 years to come up with curriculum for them. I had an epiphany, and some folks on my team too, just a quick little story, that my dishwasher broke. And what did I do? I looked at YouTube, I looked at a YouTube video, and I fixed it. And I was like, wow, this is the future of learning, I believe. How do we institute it at large for our entire institution? And so that's what the genesis of the INX is. And we'll get going real quick on it. I'm always terrible with sharing screens. Okay, so the INX, Naval Experimental Test and Training Center, essentially what we're doing here is it's a set of pilot classrooms. We're piloting courses, but at the same time, we're creating our own mock-ups. You have to understand too as well, procurement is quite difficult in the Department of National Defense. So what we told each other is, why don't we just create and 3D print our own mock-ups and then use augmented reality and virtual reality to actually teach the subject product. And we did that for many reasons. One, because of the rapid evolution of our fleets right now. We were getting so much new gear, we couldn't come up a pace with new sort of curriculum enough. So instead we said, well, the problem is easy. Why don't you just kind of fake it? So on top of that, we actually have, and the center also, because I had to convince all our infrastructure folks that we wanted to build a facility, and they said, absolutely not, because that's tied into infrastructure. We said it's going to be off grid. And we said we're going to design it like a ship, in a sense that power management, black water, gray water was all going to be managed by our students. And so it's also a working mechanical plant. And so in that, they're actually going to be fixing it as they would. And what I keep telling the team is that if you can't fix the INX Center, you can't fix a $2 billion asset at sea in the middle of the Pacific. And from that, you can also see too that we have immersive trainers. That, by the way, the immersive trainer, we are in contract as of 2 days ago. So it is happening. We're going to deliver in February timeframe. So right here, I got a quick little video to show, and then we will. I'm supposed to show digital literacy, and I I am always, like I said, the worst at this. So first, what I'll do is quickly show you an embedded video, which is always more difficult to do. There we go. Loading. And here we go. All right. Well, for some reason, how about this? All right, apologies for that, technical difficulties. So what I will do is I will share the link in the chat, and I will send it to the team. Essentially, it explains here, really what the essence of the INX Center is, both from an environmental standpoint, also pandemic safe. So what we did do is we actually included quite a bit of high-grade HEPA filters in there. It's a negative pressure citadel that we actually created inside the INX Center. Those are video games, AR and VR, that we created under 6 months. They're actually real. Company out of Montreal called Chalk. The Admiral, he came to visit it and absolutely loved it. So this is all real stuff that we've created to have a fully immersive sort of environment for our students. And I just got the delivery date for the trucks. And because it's kind of like one of those prefab, we are getting it. I think delivery starts, the trucks are loading November 20th. So we're a bit behind schedule, and that's really, I'm blaming Zoom, frankly, just because of our supply chain has been a complete nightmare. We have to, even doorknobs are impossible to get these days. Okay, quick overview. It's a vehicle for testing innovation, cutting edge technologies. And really, it might be the most clean tech building in government that's coming up, definitely in the near term. Impetus for change, we have a rapidly evolving new fleet. As I mentioned, we wanted feedback for training. So even when my team developed a course, oftentimes we were getting feedback right away saying it was terrible, and it was going to take us another 2 years to actually redevelop. So instead, we're going to have a rapid feedback sort of OODA loop, like Duncan mentioned as well. So rapid development, progressive green technology is really what we're pushing here in this center. That's just a quick overview. That's actually the factory left in Ontario, Chesterfield, Ontario. This is roughly how much power sources and sort of the green tech that we're actually putting on board. And we should be in contract even now for a cutting edge flow battery. So we're really excited about that. And we are going to be digital twinning the entire power management with a company out of Ottawa called 5G Technologies. So they're going to be really managing our digital sort of factory for power. We got 3D printers, we got metal 3D printers, we have immersive technology, and we really have a robust sort of infrastructure with Microsoft as well to help with our curriculum management. Every student is going to have a workstation at the INX Center, but also what we're going to be doing is sending home quite a bit of VR and AR kits so that they can actually, we can gamify it, and when they've reached a certain amount of levels of training, that we can actually, they can come back to the INX Center and we validate their learning, frankly. Really, we want to keep things interesting. I can tell you a lot of stories that I probably shouldn't about how the folks today joining the Navy, are expecting high tech. And when we don't deliver that, they actually get disappointed and seek alternatives. That's all I can say, really. And so right now, we understand that, we all want the latest iPhones or the latest products in our hands. And so we decided to go that route. And so far, at the very least, our current staff is really jazzed about where we're going with all this sort of stuff. Then I'm going to switch gears towards AR because, just a quick little story, and we call them a DIT in the Navy. Just recently, we got a call from a ship that had a broken part. That's all I'm going to say about that, really, across the ocean in Asia. And the OEM could not go and actually conduct the repairs because the next port of call had strict COVID measures. So they knew we were deep into AR. And when I say they, I mean the rest of the engineering institution gave us a call, said, could we do this for real in the field? And there's a lot of naysayers, a lot of security concerns. And as Duncan mentioned, thank God he actually had such a robust security infrastructure. We said, you know what, we're going to test it locally on one of the ships, on the second deck, so surrounded with steel, frankly, and it worked better than what we thought. And I would say all we needed to do to actually create the Wi-Fi hotspot was a Pixel 5 from Google phone. That was enough using our 4G network over here in Victoria, BC, to actually do. And we have all the metrics. We have a huge presentation about it, and we were blown away. From that, I believe it actually happened last week, or it's going to happen pretty soon. We're going to test it out across the ocean at our next port of call, and this time is going to be somewhere in the South Pacific. So all that to say is, this is not, where we think things are going. We are doing it right now, and it became an operational imperative, a necessity. And from that, we feel as if we need to keep learning and pushing the boundaries for adoption. What I would say, and what I appreciated from our colleague at C-SPAN, was adoption is going to be key, and we all have different journeys. And to be quite frank, it was difficult to even convince people that we trained and that we knew very well within our engineering institution in the Navy to say, this is the way we're going to go. And when we showed it, everyone was like, oh yeah, game on. So frankly, what I would say is adoption is going to be probably one of the most difficult things. I don't think it's a technological sort of barriers, and really on the sort of feasibility side, it's really going to be about viability and desirability moving down the road. I will, in the next presentation, talk about MAST, but just a quick overview. We're going to be electrifying old derelict boats. We're calling it Maritime Adaptive Skills Training Program. It's going to be part of the INEX Center. We want to give an experiential sort of like cadavers for sailors. And from that, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using quite a bit of VR and AR at the design cycle of it. But what we want to do is teach our engineering officers the whole life cycle of procurement all the way down to project closure. So I'll get into it the next presentation. We're really excited about this. The video I'll be showing to you is hot off the press, and I'll try to be playing around with it just to see if it works or not. Again, I'll post the Vimeo link afterwards. This is the location where everything's going. So please come and visit us in Victoria when it's up and running. We expect everything to be good to go in February. I won't show budgets, but really they're all actually, frankly, in happening. But these are all the companies. So just to mention that we are pretty much, no, I say sponsoring, but really SMBs, at least 15 or 16 across the country, all Canadian, using Innovation Solutions Canada program, the former BCIP. We put them all together, and they're all working together. And I truly believe, and it's not because my team is doing this, that this is going to be a powerhouse for Canadian innovation moving forward. So we're really excited about it. That's all I got. And thank you so much. Pause share.
Thanks so much, Maze. Yeah, it's super exciting to see these examples actually come to life and be used in the real world. We all know the theoretical examples, so seeing it happen in real life is super exciting. And then, yeah, so before we kick off to the next panel, we're going to hear from Peter Hoek, representing Prairies Economic Development Canada and PacifiCan, part of the initiative of the Government of Canada. The creation of PacifiCan and Prairies Economic Development Canada earlier this year is part of the Government of Canada's efforts to augment economic development and innovation in these two Canadian regions by recognizing the unique approaches and characteristics of their innovators, entrepreneurs, institutions, and communities. Peter, welcome to the show, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Greg. And by coincidence, the rearrangement of schedule gives me a nice segue into Maze's presentation, because of course he's now within a new regional development agency's mandate area. He would now be part of Prairies Can. So just a bit of background quickly. Effective August the 5th of this year, the former Western Economic Diversification Canada, which many of you have worked with in the past, became two distinct economic agencies. One of them represents Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba. That is Prairies Can, Prairies Economic Development Canada. And the second new agency is PacifiCan, which is the Pacific Economic Development Agency for Canada, otherwise known as PacifiCan. And its area of interest is British Columbia. So as of 2 days ago, with the cabinet announcement, we now have ministers for each of these departments. Dan Vandal is responsible for Prairie's Economic Development Canada, as well as the Canadian Northern Economic Development Agency, and he continues his existing role as Minister for Northern Affairs. New for the new department is Harjit Sajan, who many of you know from the defense context, of course, and he is now minister responsible for Minister of International Development, but also the Minister for Pacific Economic Development Canada, PacifiCan. In functional terms, which is of course what's of the interest in this particular ITB and defense procurement environment, is that it makes some difference and it doesn't make some difference. The ITB team that was with WD is continuing to represent both PacifiCan and Prairies Can, while the transition and standing up of full capacity for PacifiCan is ongoing, which will take place for quite some time yet. What was formerly WD has become Prairies Can, and PacifiCan is the new agency which is standing up new capacity. So if you're a prime contractor, if you're another government department, you're a tier 1 supplier on a defense procurement contract, you contact the folks in Ottawa for either PacifiCan or Prairies Can. If you're a Western Canadian company or post-secondary institution, your primary point of contact would be PacifiCan if you're in British Columbia, or if any of the Prairies provinces, your point of contact would be the ITB team for your specific province. There's a local team in each province, and we work with them closely to bring the two sides of the table together for defense procurement and ITB issues. And that's it for me on the update. Happy to entertain any questions later on if anybody has anything.
Thanks so much, Peter. Yeah, I'd like to invite everyone to turn their cameras on and come back in. Maze, Duncan, and Wolfgang as well, who you guys have met in the first session of our day today. Yeah, and we'll hop into the panel. So Wolfgang, perhaps we could start with you. We've heard from government and industry. How are Canadian SMEs partnering up with universities to further R&D, and what type of R&D is actually taking place?
Sorry about that. So there is some partnering with the universities. There's various programs from NSERC and MITAX and so on that actually make it easier for people to collaborate with the universities. And these are actually leading to some nice outcomes. I mean, I have quite a few of collaborations that I've done over the past, and some of them have led to some very interesting outcomes. I will be honest, I will say that there is some reluctance sometimes on part of the companies to collaborate. I mean, intellectual property is always an issue to discuss, but I also will say that I think that is a question of expectations on both sides, right? I mean, a company cannot get everything for free, but it's also not realistic to have the intellectual property reside completely on the university side. So there needs to be a give and take, and I think that's the real thing to keep in mind. I'll leave it there for now. Sorry.
Peter, I know that one of the objectives of the ITB program is to push towards that partnerships and the partnering and build on that. From your experience, what's the best way to get these partnerships going and tackle some of these challenges that Wolfgang mentioned?
So yeah, absolutely. ITB is certainly a way that both companies and post-secondary institutions can find their way find help and assistance getting more into the innovation space. Under the ITB policy, a contractor who's bidding on a defense procurement project has to submit a value proposition. And the key thing to remember about value propositions, they're tailored. There's a specific value proposition aligned with each defense procurement project. And that's developed through a whole process of analysis by industry science and economic development with input from outside experts and industry to find the best match between what we can ask of bidders and what they could deliver in terms of an economic value proposition to Canada. And one of the things that the VP does is trying to incent investment into innovation. So my response is going to be in two parts. First of all, there's things you don't want to do in terms of trying to attract ITB investment into your project. And then the second is to look more at what you can do to positively position yourself. The first thing is to realize that a bidder putting together a value proposition is looking at a hugely complex interaction of factors. This is what Canada wants, this is what their company is doing, what their company's doing and wants to go, how much money they have to spend, what the value proposition tells them are the places they should be investing. So for you to be able to predict as a company or as a post-secondary institution what the value proposition they may be seeking looks like is going to be very, very difficult. For one thing, you may not have access to the value proposition documents themselves, but you don't know all those variables. You just can't know all those variables in the background. So, and then the other thing is, be aware when you start thinking about, well, we've got a project going, we could use ITB money here. The timeframes are all wonky in terms of ITB. It's a really long cycle from the entry into the defense procurement process through bid development, through evaluation, through contract award. If you're looking for money you can use next year, you're looking in the wrong place. You've got to be thinking longer term here. So then what can you do? What makes sense to do if you're looking for ITB opportunities? First of all, create your own solid project, a project that makes sense on its own terms, something you want to do, it's something you want to pursue, something you want to develop, and you have a longer term vision for it. It's not a flash in the pan, we're going to do this year and then move on. Once you have got your project solid, you know who you're working with, you know what your objectives are, you found out your immediate source of funding, government funding, industry investment, if it's partners outside of the ITB space, and if you're a company, obviously with investors. Once you've got your business plan sorted out, you know where you want to go, then maybe you can think about, okay, so we've got this plan, what do we want to do in the longer term where a bit more money that we're not counting on, but be really good to have, could really help us out? Do you want to extend the project as a new avenue you would want to pursue? Things you might be able to do if you had that incremental funding above and beyond your existing resources. So then you can look at, okay, so we know that because we're going to talk to our local RDA, who knows which projects are in play and who's bidding on them and has an idea what they're interested in, or a consultant if that's the way you want to go. But you're going to talk to some people who know about who's working on stuff and say, okay, what are these guys interested in? So is there something there that we could put into our long-term business plan and think about as a destination for ITB investment? And that could be, remember, could be money, it could be intellectual property, a knowledge transfer, it could be transfers of equipment. Bidders can get credit for those kinds of investments. So where could that fit in? Then is there anything that we could do to structure our project without distorting it or changing it to make our project more interesting? So you can go to, this is where you hear about the multipliers, right? You go to the ITB website and you have a look and you say, okay, so I could get, if it's a straight research project as a PSI, post-secondary institution, the bidder could get a 5 times credit multiplier. Remember, it's not the money they provide to you, it's the credit they get for it could be multiplied by 5 times. So that's interesting. If I formed a consortium, so a post-secondary, and if I'm a company, if I could find my way to work with a post-secondary institution on our project, form a consortium to develop a product or service, that could be worth multipliers as well. So you start to factor in those things into your calculations. So you have a solid project of your own. You have a project where you thought about how this might be interesting to an ITB, somebody with ITB obligations to fill. So then the next thing is to let people know about what you've got and what you're offering. So take what you've got, the information you've got, and put together your own value proposition. What makes your project different from the competition's? Because if you're talking about an AI project, there are lots of people doing AI research or AI product development. what makes you different? What makes you special? What do you have to offer? Think about what it is that if you get into a conversation with an ITB, a company that has ITB obligations, what is it you would want from them? Is there a bit of IP that you know they might have that could really further your research in a particular direction? Is there some kind of equipment that they could provide? Or is it straight cash? Like, if you provided this much cash, we could do this. And be aware you're entering into negotiation. They have their interests, you have your interests, and you're going to have to talk your way through that. As I said earlier, let your RDA, the RDA for your region, know about your project, what you're interested in, who you might want to work with, because we as an RDA community, we're in regular contact with the bidders on defense procurement projects, and our job is really marketing. We have companies you could do business with, we have projects you could invest in, we have things you could do for ITB credit in our region. So we push that out to you, and then be aware of opportunities to meet with bidders and bring your value proposition to them. There's the trade shows. DefSec was a couple of weeks ago. There's CanSec coming up. They all have an ITB B2B component to them. And then, of course, includes our own Western Innovation Forum, which is coming up next March in Calgary, where the RDAs work very hard to put you together with people who are looking for investment opportunities. But when you sit down for that meeting, you want to know who you are and what you're offering above and beyond just your basic project. What is the incremental addition that an ITB obligation fulfillment could make to your project, and the benefit to the company with that obligation they're trying to fulfill. So it's take what you've got and market it, but be aware that your project has to be yours to start with and end with.
Duncan is part of an organization that's done that's built these partnerships. How do the things that Peter say resonate to you, or what are some of the strategies you employ when you're thinking about partnering with groups?
I think the one that resonates more than anything else is the reality of how long it takes to build those partnerships in order to align with an ITB funding strategy on the part of a defence prime. So I mean that's the one I would take straight out of the gate, and I've seen that from both sides because I was responsible for doing that when I was working with Springboard. On the academic innovation side as well. So it really does take a long time. And it's because you're building trust. And that's, it's not just trust in you as an individual, it's also trust, talking from an SME's perspective. It's trust in the fact that your organization can deliver what it says it can deliver. And you've got to sort of really build that side of the partnership up really effectively over a long period of time. But the rewards are great. And I'd also sort of, the one thing I'd reflect on more than anything else, and I think it comes back to some of your opening comments when we were starting the discussion, Greg, and that's the depth of expertise that we have here in Canada. People genuinely don't get it. Canada is leading the world in spatial computing. Microsoft moved the majority of their workforce in spatial computing from the US to Canada. That's not their global headquarters because they'll still retain that down in the US, but most of the work's being done out of Vancouver. That's just testament in itself. And then when you look at all of the small and medium businesses that are in this space, the ones that are plowing their own pathways, they're all there in a way which really sort of reflects, I think, the genuine Canadian approach to innovation. And an understanding that mixed reality and augmented reality and spatial computing is part of the future. And that all aligns with the Government of Canada's key industrial capabilities. So if you take any one of the groups that we work with in defence and look at the end use cases, they line up easily against at least 6 of the key industrial capabilities. And if you can go to a defence prime and say, look, key industrial capabilities, I know they're not the overriding principle or the overriding function of an ITB play, but they're important because this is what the Canadian Armed Forces are saying that they need. That's where they want to see the innovation. And again, in that context of defence, which ITBs are all inextricably linked to almost, that aspect is really important. And having an understanding, and I'm going to come to another point which is pretty important in a moment. having that understanding of what the end user needs is really important. And what's really benefited as a company is not just only having me as a veteran in that sense, but we've at one point 25% of our workforce were veterans, and they're able to speak to that user, that person, that guy or that girl who's going to use augmented mixed reality when they're tired, they're wet, they're hungry, they're under pressure to do a job effectively. They're not 100% certain that the information that they're getting is correct because they've heard it from various places, speaking to sensed data. And having that understanding of that individual, I think, is really key when you're starting to build that relationship up and say, look, we've got a proposal. We think that it's something that aligns with Maze's group. And what we've got this expert input into it, which says this is something that soldiers, sailors, or airmen in the Canadian Armed Forces would find of real benefit, and it lines up against key industrial capabilities. And we're going to be working with Simon Fraser University and the University of New Brunswick to create the IP. And it speaks to that sophistication of how you approach the primes that Peter mentioned. Go to them with a plan and say, this is what we've got. And if it works and they're interested, that's great. If it doesn't, the one thing I've had to learn is that, and this is just, again, it's just a reflection of my character, is you can only knock on the door a number of times. If somebody's not interested, they're not interested, you need to move on. But somebody somewhere will really understand what it is that you're trying to achieve and what you're trying to do. And then finally, the last thing I would say is MyTax is a phenomenal multiplier on top of that. So if people do come into this, then they're looking for teams that are going to really make the maximum benefit of, one, the technology opportunity that we've got, but also the ITB opportunity we've got. Then once you've got an ITB on board, then using MyTax, which again just sort of doubles the impact within the organisations, the educational organisations that you work with, is really significant as well. And they're a great group to work with and very well aligned with an awful lot of the tech areas that we want to exploit in augmented and mixed reality. So that's it. I know that's a big answer. I've probably rambled on a little bit there, but there's a lot of good things coming out of this discussion, hopefully for everybody who's listening.
I really like one of the things you said, the idea of building that trust, and that's something I kind of like to open up to the panel. And Wolfgang, I see you have your hand up.
Sorry, I just wanted to add something. Thank you very much, Duncan, for saying what you say. I want to point out that NSERC actually has changed its funding model for the collaborations, right? I mean, it used to be the Engage grants and so on. There's now a new program called Alliance, which actually is structured quite differently and potentially serves the need of industrial partners better. So if people are not familiar with that, I encourage you to check that out. Sorry, Greg.
No worries. Well, I'd like to open it up a bit and ask about the idea of the trust and Maze. Anyone, feel free to jump in.
I'll quickly say that even though it's good to check with the primes, ultimately the primes most of the time pick up the phone and call those who are in contract with us, pick up the phone and call us, right? And say, is this where you're going? Does it sound good? And so I'd say that's number one. Really. So at the end of the day, it's actually more powerful when it solves one of our problems because they're actually trying to sell it to us. Secondly, what I would say, it is about trust. You have to understand that. I'd say most of the people in uniform end up in the defense industry afterwards. So we all know each other. So that trust is already vested. But when an outlier, an outsider comes in, it's a more difficult. And so create that trust. It's very easy. The easiest way is having a really good product that solves our problems, right? To trust, checked. So based on that, and really also is find somebody who understands our cycles and our pressures. So don't come to us in February and March because our heads are in somewhere else, right? Understand our fiscal pressures, understand when things happen. And then, unfortunately, we're in a very cyclical organization where we lose our job, get change jobs every 2 years. So kind of don't hit your wagon on somebody who's about to leave. Really, those are the practical tips I'd give you right now, is that, it's very cyclical. Don't get somebody who's new. Also get somebody who's also staying in that same sort of realm and is a familiar face time and time again, and will point you into those right directions. That would be my advice to those who are seeking an in on the ITB realm, because we all know each other. Frankly, we've all seen each other and been panelists somewhere else together. That's all I got.
I just want to pick up on something Duncan said. I think it's a really good point, actually. I think looking at the kicks is a great way of kickstarting your own initiatives, but also positioning yourself in the absence of a particular project. Always be aware of what the key industrial capabilities are, and then how do they line up with what you as a company are doing now, company or a post-secondary are doing now, and where you might want to go. Because I mean, Duncan's absolutely right. These set out the big, broad priorities of national defense. So if you stay within the realm of the kicks on a project, regardless of whether there's a project that you see being bid in relation to that kicks, you can start the conversation 2 or 3 years in advance by going to a B2B event and just saying, hey, we're the company that does this, we're the university of that. And by the way, we have some interests and expertise that line with the following kicks. So later on, when the bidder who is going to have ITB obligations starts going through the Rolodex and going, okay, who do we want to talk to? They've already had a chat with you about some possible things you might want to do a couple of years ago. So use kicks as a primer for lining yourself up in this priming the pump and aligning yourself in the space generally.
Just to add on that really quickly too, if you're about to approach a prime, I would say also look at their global markets in the sense that, are you going to solve their problems in France or in the UK or something like that? And so don't just make it sometimes a uniquely Canadian issue. Great, this is where it's going to be born and grown. But after that, if they're in the rail business in Europe, but actually it's an IoT device you're selling, or or like Duncan keeps mentioning too as well, where they're not just defense anymore, they're or ever, but really solves other problems. And so some of the primes, and actually I don't think any primes are a one-trick pony really. They do have 4 or 5 business units that sometimes when you even simply go to their website, it's like, hey, we do that. Well, then go talk to those people. Don't talk to the people who are just going to do this minutia for you. That's another tip.
Yeah, great. I think we have a couple of audience questions here, and I want to make sure we have time to answer them. So I'll move on to those. And I'll open this up, and anyone feel free to jump in. Matthew asks, how have superclusters had an impact on your organizations? Yeah, Maze, I see your smile on there as soon as I said supercluster.
Well, I'll jump into here because I mean the Boeing project in my case was clearly a collaboration that was initiated through the supercluster, at the digital supercluster here in BC. I think they're an interesting method to actually get various parties to the table and to get the conversation started. And a different method than was employed before, I'll say that. And so I've benefited in a sense, but I mean Boeing has also benefited. It's not just me, right? So that's great. I think it's yet another mechanism to get people to talk, really, and that's really what it is about, right? That's actually the hard part, getting people to talk. I mean, building on what others said before here.
I would echo that. What I've seen though is that I've been in contact with companies that otherwise would not have been, because they have created their own sort of consortiums and groups within the superclusters. I do wish that they actually spoke a bit more to the frontline federal agencies to actually say, hey, what is it you really, really need? Digital is a large word. Ocean is a large word. You know what I mean? But we do have specific niche needs. And at the end of the day, my gut tells me that those are still federal funds to a great extent. There are contributions, there are machinations, I do understand that. But so we should all be working together to solve a uniquely, to me, I see it as economic security, and we're on the security realm. So I wish it just spoke more to meeting those demands. Not saying that they aren't, but I'm just saying that they do benefit from connecting us though with firms that would have never met otherwise. They just weren't paying attention to the whole defense side. That's all I got.
They're great. They all have the problems. we went to the advanced manufacturing supercluster and were told that mixed reality wasn't an advanced manufacturing technology, which was kind of a little bit of a shock to us, because it's consistent in being one of the 8 driving technologies for advanced manufacturing. So I think there was some challenges as those groups have started to mature. But I think as they've got to the point where their delivery mechanisms and their interactive capabilities are really significant, then they've really started to gain a significant amount of momentum. We've got 2 projects with the Ocean Supercluster, and they're both great because they're near. They're in that exact realm where they need to be. They're sort of TRL7 moving to TRL9. So what we'll be able to do is take things on and really create, again, world-leading capability right here in Canada with other Canadian partners. And that interaction that we're having with the groups that are involved in both of those projects, we probably, as a small and medium business, wouldn't have been able to achieve that without the medium of the Ocean Supercluster in that case. And importantly, from our perspective, that what that does is that the work that they're doing actually acts as that sort of partnership building team that we would rather have allocated to working on other things in the company as we build our IP, build our sales base, and so on. So I think they're a real force multiplier, when they're used properly. They do come with their snags and they come with their issues, but they're really good. And I'm really looking forward to what the next phase will be as they're recapitalized. And hopefully I'll get over to Wolfgang and have a chat with him about what we can do when the digital supercluster has been recapped in the next budget.
Peter, what about from your perspective? How do you see superclusters, and how do they impact what you do? Sorry, you just might be still muted there.
I think Wolfgang is right, and Wolfgang and Maze. I mean, they provide a place for companies to interact who might not otherwise have thought about interacting, and if they create value for multiple parties because they come up with an idea that, oh, you do this and we do that, and what if we did it together? What else could we do? I mean, there's huge potential there. So I don't know that we've really had occasion to, I'll put it this way. I'm not aware of us having tapped a supercluster result directly, but you do sometimes wonder, because I mean, where a university comes to you with an idea, you're not entirely sure the genesis of those sometimes. As a result of a collaboration through a supercluster, I don't know. But absolutely, and as much as they create dialogue and get people working together, creating new ideas, then I think they're potentially very valuable. Absolutely.
One of the things you mentioned earlier, you asked kind of rhetorically, what makes you different when you're applying for ITB, et cetera. And I kind of want to open that up too. What, for example, Wolfgang, how do you tell the people involved in your project what makes you different? How do you sell it to them in that way?
Well, so that's a loaded question for me, because I mean, I'm at the university. My product per se is students and research papers, right? I mean, per se, right? That's what I'm basically here to do, right? I train people and I come up with new knowledge, right? Or come up with knowledge that extends the current state of the art. Now, there's a fine line here, because there's a spectrum of purely neural knowledge, right, where we actually build things that have never been done before. I was part of the high dynamic range display, which is a technology that in the 2000s, where we actually early 2000s, where we actually built a technology that's today in most high-end TVs, right? But there's a lot of engineering in between where we actually, we know we can do this, but we need to make it better, right? So there's a lot of innovation there too. And so there's I want to reflect that spectrum. And academia tends to be more on that side, whereas industry tends to be more on that side, but there's exceptions here as well, right? So yeah, I'll just leave it at that, right? Yeah. Whoever else wants to jump in here.
Yeah, Mazer Duncan, how do you approach that? How do you approach what makes you different, or answering that question?
It's a really good question, because it's I think it's a really clear understanding of where the market's at, and it's also a really clear understanding of when what we see a lot of the time, and it causes us issues as a small company, especially when large companies claim they can do things that they can't. And we've had that recently, where we've had a large company come back to us and in our space, they're technical experts, and say, yeah, what we've been saying, we've been doing, well, we can't, we need your help to fix it, please. We obviously can't divulge what that is and so on, but when you get engineering contracts that are sort of trying to unstick things, it's being honest with people, but it's, I think, more importantly than anything else, it's just making people understand that particularly as a small Canadian company, we're good at where we want to be. And again, it's an expression I love, and I heard it earlier on, is with Jennifer, I think, mentioned it, trying not to boil the ocean, and trying not to convince people that you can do everything. And again, back to that trust bit, when somebody says, can you do something? If you can't, say no. We don't need to be ashamed that we can't do everything, because we're good at what we do, and we can always bring the conversation back to that. And again, it sort of revolves around that the importance of trust and understanding, because in most cases, when you say you can't do something, most people would say, oh, that's all right, we're just asking because that's on our technical roadmap or something along those lines. But then if you can then take that conversation on to the next step, is, well, when do you want to get there and how do you want to get there? That's when we bring our academic partners in, and that's when we bring our research partners in to sort of say, well, we've got this challenge, and we've had 2 or 3 customers that have said they'd like to go in that particular direction. Let's think about how we can tackle the challenges. Real world anchors was the real one for us about 4 years ago. How do you stop things floating around in space? Well, one of our customers wanted, quite rightly, wanted those holograms to be fixed in space. And people were saying they could do it, but they couldn't. As soon as you started to move away from things, an object which you would hope to be in the same place when you went back to it would start to drift. And so what we did was went to our research partners and said, right, how do we solve the real world anchors problem? It's a technical term, but it's one that I can understand, so hopefully everybody else can. And then we built a really successful partnership out of that, not just with our academic partners at the University of New Brunswick, but also with the customer, who saw that as being a problem for their long-term use. And they were at an early stage in their development, and they've gone on since that point to have scale deployments. But the reality was that without us being able to do that in the long term, 3 years in advance, they knew that there was no way that their workforce would accept the system for use. So it's kind of, again, I've talked around the question, but hopefully in that sense, it gives you a good idea of the approach about how we're different. It's listening, simply listening to what your customer wants. I think that makes a lot of IT companies different, because a lot of companies don't listen. All they do is try and sell.
I'll quickly jump in on that too as well, because I saw. I recognize another sort of question along those lines. Who do we pick? The reason why I love the ISE sort of former BCIP program already is because, frankly, somebody else did the picking, so it's not sole sourcing at all. So it's almost like when you go to their website, like shopping at Amazon. All right, and you're like, click, let me see the pitch video and whatever. But quickly, what I like really, even in that realm, and the question is how do you pick somebody outside of that? What I would say is, you almost know who this is their oxygen, right? If I went to like a startup or whatever who was ISE qualified, and they had these, only a geek would have this sort of router, right? And you're just looking around and you're like, these people are real, right? And it's you can almost feel it and sense it, that these are innovators, that these are players on the front line, and that this is their baby, and they're going to do whatever for that product or for that to become reality. Now, in my field, there are a lot who aren't, and who I call, cheerers. They're hypers. They're LinkedIn hype people, right? And then you see it right away. And so it's really understanding those dynamics. You sense it. But frankly, it's also being able to have, to me, one of the most telltale best signs is folks who have been bootstrapped, who really are, post revenue, all right, had something or just maybe selling something on their own and don't really need you, but then working with you and became eligible, really, that's when they explode and, what I call emergence. So to me, those who aren't granting organizations that are SMBs, I'm not talking about academics, right, who have gone from one grant to the other, to the other, to the other, and clearly don't have something desirable to show for. So really, and you don't have to, just, I don't know, it's a little bit about hunger, frankly, because for many of us, this is our oxygen. This is what we not live for, but, that we, gets us, up in the morning during the pandemic, frankly. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thanks so much, Maze. Unfortunately, we're out of time for this session, but we'll be hopping quickly into the next one. Thanks so much, Peter, Duncan, Maze, and Wolfgang for joining us and for presenting. I think Duncan, Maze, and Wolfgang, you're in the next session as well. So if anyone in the audience has a question for one of them, feel free to save it for the next session that we're just about to jump into with Jennifer and Dennis. Yeah, thanks so much, everyone.